Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Vitality Wellbeing Programme. My name is Jamie, and I am really excited to host this event today in partnership with Headspace and in alignment with World Sleep Day 2023. Now, the importance of sleep is something that's always been front of mind for me, and I think it's certainly been highlighted more recently with some stats coming out showing that the average person in the UK gets around 6.5 hours sleep each night. However, I think that with the demands of modern life, this is maybe going to become increasingly more difficult. And I've often spoken about people who have only wished to get that amount of sleep. So our theme for this month is all about supporting and maintaining those healthy behaviors. And I think the most effective habits that we have are probably those which have a knock-on effect to lots of different areas of our lives. And I think sleep is probably the best example of that. If you get a good night's sleep, the chances are other things in your day are going to fall into place and you're more likely to have a good day. So with that in mind, we are super lucky today to be joined by sleep guru Laura, who's from our partners Headspace, who's going to be providing the expertise for today's conversation. So Laura, firstly, thanks so much for joining me. I would introduce you, but your CV is far too impressive for me to do. So if you could introduce yourself and then also Headspace as well, that would be amazing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So thank you for having me. So I'm an engagement manager here at Headspace. But my professional background is really in all things people. So from learning and development, talent and wellbeing. I'm also a breathwork instructor, qualified NLP practitioner, and I have an academic background in psychology. So I feel very privileged to be able to bring all of those tools and resources and all of that knowledge together to work with our partners at Headspace to help them to work with their employees and their members to just be kinder to their minds. And so for those who are perhaps newer to Headspace, we are best known as a meditation app. So we're meditation on the go. We're an app that allows us really to bring mindfulness to our whole day. So we have over 1,000 hours of content that can help you to just live your day more mindfully. And of course, we'll be referencing how meditation and mindfulness can help with this important topic of sleep that we're going to be covering today.
Amazing. I love it. And I think the best way to maybe learn a little bit more about that is you're going to give us an example straight away. And Laura, I hope you're not going to put us to sleep because there's a long way to go with this, but maybe just calm us a little bit. Is that the intention?
That's definitely the intention, yes. So I would invite you, Jamie, and everybody listening to join me for a short meditation. And so in preparation for this, what I'd ask is that you can sit with a nice straight posture with your feet flat on the floor. I find that really helps to get us grounded, with your hands just resting in your lap or wherever's most comfortable for you. And we start just with the eyes open, with a nice soft focus somewhere. And as I give you just a moment to get comfortable and find that comfortable position for you, the next voice that you hear will be that of our wonderful meditation teacher, Kessonga.
Let's begin by adopting a comfortable posture, either sitting or lying down. And if it's comfortable for you, taking a nice, gentle, deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And with that exhalation, returning the breath to its natural rhythm and allowing the body to completely release into the surface beneath you. And if it's comfortable for you, letting the eyes gently close. Also noticing any distracting thoughts and or feelings that may be present, and then gently letting them go. And now noticing how each part of the body begins to unwind. The toes and feet, the muscles in the lower and upper legs, completely letting go. And now the pelvis, the back, stomach, and chest. The muscles here totally softening, releasing any tension along the way. The shoulders, the arms, the hands, and the fingers, all gently letting go. And continuing up through the neck and into the face and head, the mouth, cheeks, nose, eyes, ears, and forehead. Every part gently releasing and unwinding along the way. As we gently conclude this meditation, allowing your eyes to gently open if they were closed, or perhaps you may want to keep them closed for just a few more moments before you shift into your next activity.
Okay, so I'll just give you a moment to come back into the space.
No, you've not set me up for this. He's got a really calming voice, though, hasn't he?
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah,
Great.
one of my favourite voices in the app, and purposely selected that meditation because it can be found within the sleep section of our app, and I think it's a wonderful wind down that we can use as part of our bedtime routine.
Yeah, I love it. And 2 minutes, it flies by, but actually I think seems to do quite a lot in that short amount of time, which is amazing. And I think that leads us on quite nicely to the first slide, which is potentially more about the problem, you might think, in terms of the sleep epidemic that's potentially being reported a little bit more. And Laura, I think I'm always really conscious of our audience here, and there's so many different types of people that attend these events. You've got parents who maybe think it's impossible to sleep, and kids make that really difficult sometimes, so we want to be empathetic towards them and understanding. But then there's other people who find it hard to sleep or are anxious, so we're going to do our best to cover as many different questions today as we possibly can. I'll weave those in, but I'm going to pass over to you maybe firstly to kind of just background information on why we actually need to sleep.
Yeah, of course. So you'll see here we've got sleep epidemic, and I genuinely believe that epidemic is, although it's a big word, it's the right word for us to be using when we think about our sleep. What we do know is that sleep plays a hugely important role in many different capacities. So from helping us to repair our muscle tissue, to developing new cell growth. It's really important in terms of our immune systems and our heart health. And it helps us with processing our emotions, our memory recall, so many more things. I could, list the benefits of sleep all day. And actually, when we consider sleep in context of food and being hydrated and exercise, sleep is just as, if not more important than all of those different aspects. Yet often, you mentioned before, we live in this really busy, fast-paced, modern, technology-driven world. All of those things mean we often as a society don't really give our sleep the same level of importance or priority that we maybe do with our food and exercise and hydration. But what we do know is that around about a third of the global adult population aren't getting that kind of required 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. And around 10 to 20% of, again, the global adult population suffer with quite frequent sleep disturbances. And that can impact our executive function, so our ability to make decisions, have clarity and be really focused, can make us a bit irritable. It means that we have less memory recall. So it's a hugely important part of our routine, and one that I definitely think we need to be giving more focus to right now.
I think there's so many things there that you mentioned that it's almost like it loses some of the importance. But I think where I really recognize the value of sleep for me personally, when I used to compete in sport, it was more there's all of the things that you mentioned about kind of like memory and cell repair and function and things like that. I found it quite difficult to tangibly look at and see that's what was happening and the difference between a good night and not good night. But where I really, really recognized it was in my sort of motivation, decision making, sort of drive. Like if there was an option between a good meal and a bad meal, or a right decision and a wrong decision, if I was basing that off not enough sleep, it would often lead me down the wrong path. And I think that actually for me was where one of my favorite sayings was, the key to a good night, a good morning starts the night before with a good night's sleep. Yeah. And that always set me up nicely. So how would you encourage people to value the sleep so for me, the way that I valued it most was when I could actually recognize what it was doing. But do you have any advice for people how to really prioritize sleep as just an important pillar, as like you said, exercise or nutrition or anything else?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me is really around bringing awareness to what happens to our bodies and minds in those moments when we've not had a great night's sleep, and using that as the motivation, the discipline to really focus on our sleep. So, you know, on those days when we've had a poor night of sleep, really actually bringing some awareness to what happens the next day. So what are my relationships like? I mean, my kids and my partner will definitely attest to the fact that if I've had a bad night's sleep, I am grumpy.
Yeah.
So bringing some awareness to the state of our relationships, our productivity at work. And I think when we become more aware of these things that are impacted by a lack of sleep, we're more likely to find the motivation to reprioritize sleep in our routine.
And in terms of your experience, why do you think we aren't getting enough sleep?
Oh gosh, so many reasons. And I know you mentioned a few of them before. So whether it's things that are, you know, to a degree outside of our control, you know, perhaps we've had new children in the family, and of course they rule the roost when they're babies and dictate our sleep patterns. But if I focus more on the things that we can control, technology use is definitely up there. I think our sleep competes with the next episode of our favourite TV programme. Maybe I'm speaking to myself there, definitely guilty. So technology use, social media, you know, many of us scroll before bed, and we end up down a rabbit hole of different bits of content, or maybe we're getting likes on our social media posts and we get that little hit of dopamine. So our reward centres open up, and, you know, we're training our brain to place our focus there. And then when you overlay that with things like shift work, jet lag for those of us that are frequent travellers, there are so many things that are competing for our time and our attention, that again, sometimes we just deprioritise sleep in favour of perhaps in the moment more enjoyable things sometimes.
Yeah, no, I definitely see all of those things. And I think maybe historically there's been almost a badge of honor for getting not a lot of sleep. And look at me, I'm surviving off 3 hours of sleep, and I've done that. And I think, like, we'll probably get into this a bit more. Like, I feel like I can function, but actually I don't feel very good. And like, I struggle to actually do the things that I really want to do and do it consistently. So hopefully we've set the scene there. Just in terms of a little bit more of the in-depth science, I think we're going to move on to now, like, looking at the sleep cycle and the different stages of sleep. And then once we've done this, just everyone watching, we will get to a point where after we've given this background, we're going to go into exactly how maybe you can get the best night's sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually understanding the sleep cycle plays a really important part in helping us to pinpoint which actions or tips and activities we can do to help to create the right conditions for a restful night of sleep for ourselves. So in terms of this sleep cycle, there are 4 stages that we tend to pass through during this cycle. The first, very imaginatively named stage 1, is just a very light phase of sleep, and we typically spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes in this phase. And this is the transition phase where we move from wakefulness to sleepiness. So we're generally still aware of what's going on around us, but our breathing kind of starts to slow down. And then we transition into stage 2. Again, we're kind of moving more deeply into sleep. We still have some awareness of what's going on around us, and we spend between maybe 10 to 25 minutes in this second phase. And this is where our body really starts to change. So our breathing rate slows down, our heart rate slows down, our brain activity starts to slow down. But then we have these little sleep spindles, which are little spikes, and they are really helpful for memory recall. But they're also helpful in aiding us in not being randomly woken up by external activity and noise. And then we move into the third stage of the cycle, which is a more kind of mid-level of sleep. It's really at this point of the sleep cycle that our brain just completely quietens, and we move into the body's really restorative moments of sleep. So this is where we'll find muscle repair and development of new cell tissues. So it's a real focus on restoring our bodies. And then finally, we move into stage 4, which is more commonly known as REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. It's at this phase that we often spend our time dreaming. But something fascinating, or I think it's fascinating, happens in this stage too, which is that our brain becomes very active. In fact, the brain waves in stage 4 are very similar to when we're awake. So even when we dream, our brain doesn't really know what's real and what's not real. And that's why we never kind of call out some of the really strange things that happen to us when we dream. But the bit that I find fascinating is that it's in stage 4 that we go into body atonia. And that's where our brain temporarily paralyzes our arms and legs. It allows our eye muscles to continue to move, and of course, all of the muscles that we need to be able to breathe. But it keeps us in that little moment of paralysis, so that we don't actually get up, get out of bed, and act out these dreams that we might be having. And it's in this 4th stage that we are really focused on our emotional well-being and the processing of our emotions and our memory recall. And so typically, once that cycle is completed, if we do manage to sleep for between 7 to 9 hours a night, we'll go through that cycle somewhere between 4 and 6 times, and the length of each stage will differ as we move through our sleep. So lots of really important parts to each stage of that cycle.
Wow. I have so many questions. I don't have that many. I won't linger too long, but it's so interesting. So just looking at the difference between stage 3 and stage 4, you mentioned stage 4 was kind of like REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep. Would stage 3 therefore be like classed as deep sleep?
Stage 4 is classed as deep sleep.
Stage 4 is deep sleep. Okay.
Yeah, and stage 3 is, so stages 1, 2, and 3 are non-REM sleep as we move transition to kind of mid depth of sleep, and stage 4 is that really deep emotional well-being stage of sleep.
And during that stage, it sounds like that's where you get the sort of cognitive recovery time, replenishment time. In stages 1, 2, and 3, is that more like neuromuscular and like peripheral recovery, or is there a difference between what your body's focused on recovering most during sleep?
Yeah, absolutely that. So definitely stage 1 and 2 is really about us preparing to move from wakefulness to sleepiness and to get the body ready for that. So as all of those processes kind of slow down for us. Stage 3 is definitely about the preparation and repair and restoration of our body. And stage 4, so that REM sleep, that deep sleep, is definitely more focused on the more cognitive processes in terms of memory recall, processing the emotions that we might have gone through in the day. So between body and mind is really one of the key differentiators between stage 3 and REM sleep in stage 4.
Okay, amazing. And we've had lots of pre-registered questions, and one of them was, and this is something I can definitely relate to, some mornings you wake up and you're confused about where you are, and it's the hardest thing in the world to wake up. And then on other days, don't get me wrong, I always find it relatively hard to get up, but you're more alert and you feel a little bit more refreshed. Is that to do with what stage of your sleep cycle you might be waking? And if so, is the aim to try and wake up at the right time? Is that possible to do?
That's a great question. There's probably a couple of answers to that. So one relates to napping versus a full night of sleep. So what we typically find is that if you've been able to get through all 4 stages of sleep, and then you move into kind of the second round, the third round, the fourth round, regardless of which stage you wake up in, you'll generally feel more rested. Whereas if you've only had a really short period of sleep and you haven't maybe made it to stage 4 REM sleep, and you're waking up before you completed that cycle, that's definitely where you're more likely to feel groggy or tired. But I think it's also really important to note that the length of sleep that you have doesn't necessarily equal quality. And so if you find that you are having the 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, but you're still waking up feeling exhausted and groggy and grumpy in my case, it's really important for us to be able to look back and reflect on perhaps our sleep hygiene. So what's going on at night? Have we set our environment up to create the conditions for a really restful night's sleep? And what does our sleep efficiency look like, which really means of the amount of time that we're in bed, how much of that time do we actually spend sleeping? So there are lots of different variations that can mean that from one day to the next, the way that we wake up, how alert we feel could be different.
Amazing. I love it. It's so interesting. And I think following on from that, are we going to go into some myths now that you maybe are going to test me on?
Yeah, of course. So we've got a few myths, and then I'm going to test your knowledge a little bit later. So the first myth, I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, so starting with an easy one, is around, we often get told that we need 8 hours of sleep. So Jamie, what's your view on that?
I don't, firstly. I get about 6 hours 30-ish a night, if I can. And I think that for me, it seems to be more of I don't feel like I could sleep 8 hours straight anymore. Like I haven't done that for years. I think for me, the two things that seem to make the most difference is at what point I wake up on that cycle, and maybe how quickly I get to sleep and how consistent that sleep is and the quality of it. I know all of these things hard to measure, but I don't remember, like if I was to get 8 hours of sleep, I feel like I'd naturally wake up and then I'd have to force myself to go back to sleep, and that often makes me feel a little bit worse. But you might tell me that's completely wrong and I do need 8 hours.
No, so you're absolutely right. So we hear this 8 hours is kind of bandied about quite a lot. We do know from research the sweet spot is between 7 and 9 hours. But, there'll always be exceptions to that. For some people, it's a little bit less. It's very rarely any longer than that, unless we're going through a period of illness and we're looking to restore. And as I mentioned, it's kind of quality is more important than quantity. So I think remembering that we're all very unique and we all experience this thing called life in very different ways means also that the amount of sleep that we need definitely varies from person to person, but we should be aiming for that 7 to 9 hours for a restful sleep.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I do slightly undercook it. I could do it a little bit more, but 9 is maybe too much. And then I think you're going to go on to exercise.
Yeah, so the second thing that we hear quite a lot is you shouldn't exercise before bed. It's going to keep you awake. So you mentioned before, I know you've got a sporting background. So what's your experience of that one?
I think it depends on the type of exercise. I'm not really giving a very straight answer here, but I think it depends on like how stimulated your mind is. If I've been competing and it's like either a team game or a competitive event, then yeah, I would really struggle to switch off after that for maybe 2-3 hours. But I've found myself awake all night pretty much. Gentle exercise, I think maybe slightly less impactful. But the main thing for me is I exercise better in the morning anyway. So I don't actually have loads of experience with this. But yeah, I would actually say this one to me is more true than a myth, but I'm not sure again.
Yeah, really interesting one. And so I'd probably say there's kind of a half truth and half myth in this one. So what we do know from research is that firstly, exercising during the day is great for our sleep. It really helps us to kind of build up slowly this level of sleepiness that we need in order to tip us over into sleep a little bit later on. Early research or early theories, I should say, kind of showed that we should only exercise earlier in the day and that exercising later would impact our sleep. And we now know that not to be the case. So the caveat to that being that we should really leave probably about an hour before exercising and then going to bed. And the reason for that is just to allow us some time for our heart rate to regulate, so just to come back down, but for our body temperature also to just slowly start to come back down. So what I'm not doing is advocating that you go and do some hill sprints or have a boxing match, just before bed. That kind of high high alert kind of exercise isn't conducive to a good night's sleep just before we go to bed. But certainly, as you mentioned, kind of stretching, yoga, more gentle exercise can be a really nice way to wind down as part of our bedtime routine.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I've done some Pilates more recently, and it's made me feel pretty good actually before bed. And then the final one is alcohol.
Yeah,
Fact or fiction kind of thing.
yeah. So potentially might upset some people with this one, but we'll see. So what we often hear is people say, I'm really struggling to sleep, so I'm going to have a glass of wine or I'm going to have a beer before bed, and that's going to help me to both drift off to sleep and to get a really restful night's sleep. So again, I'm going to ask you if you've got any experience or maybe any thoughts on this one.
I have to be honest, I'm not actually much of a drinker, so I'm probably not best placed, but I have looked at and done lots of research and studied this, and I think it seems to be that maybe people feel like they get to sleep quicker, but the quality of their sleep is often really compromised through that. I don't know necessarily the facts, but lots of our members have activity trackers and things like that, and they'll see that they can sleep for many, many hours, but the quality of the sleep is really affected, so your recovery isn't the same. But I guess it must be dependent on the amount that you drink, like maybe one drink, not so much of a difference, but if you're having quite a few drinks, then it seems like the more maybe that you have, the worse that your recovery might be.
Yeah, full marks. Yeah, you're absolutely right on that one. Yeah, so it's alcohol can kind of trick people into thinking that they're going to have a better night's sleep because ultimately it's a drug and it has that sedative effect, so it can help us to fall asleep more quickly. But once we fall asleep, alcohol suppresses our REM sleep. So we talked about REM being that deeper sleep that we need to help us with our emotional well-being, helps us with our memory consolidation, all of those things. We don't typically get to that really restorative kind of stage of the sleep cycle. And we know that we process alcohol at around about a rate of 1 drink per hour. So in an ideal world, if we're going to have a drink, we'd probably do that 2 hours before bed to give our bodies enough time to get the alcohol out of our system, so that when we do choose to go to sleep, actually we get the quality of sleep as opposed to just the quantity of sleep. And so, earlier when we talked about the sleep cycles, we mentioned that in a typical night, we might go through the stages of sleep 4 to 6 times. But we know that when we take on board alcohol, it takes us much longer to reach REM sleep the first time. So the number of times we're likely to go through the full cycle is much less, which can leave us feeling less rested and less restored. So if you like a drink at night, it's not a problem, but just try and leave a couple of hours before your last drink, between your last drink and bed.
Perfect. I think it's great advice. And we're often, we speak about sustainability and balance, and I think that's a perfect example of that. So now, Laura, I think we're going to go on to the importance of kind of like structuring your day and also your night. And we kind of, when we were planning this, we wanted to maybe support people with just one step a little bit further than what you've commonly heard about how to get a good night's sleep. So maybe we're going to start off with actually what you can do in the daytime before you even get to thinking about a nighttime routine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important probably to start by saying that actually what we do in the day is just as important, if not more important, than what we actually do when it gets to getting to sleep. What we do in the day is the way that we prepare our bodies and minds for sleep, or set ourselves up for success. So during the daytime, there's a couple of really simple things that can help us to create those conditions for a great sleep. The first one is actually just around light. So many of you may have heard of our circadian rhythm, which is essentially our body's biological clock. And that biological clock is really kind of set by light. So when we wake up in the morning, the best way for us to let our bodies know that it is time for us to wake up and for us to be alert is to get some daylight as soon as we can in the morning, a good 30 minutes or so of daylight as soon as we wake up. And that signals to our body that it's time for us to be awake. We need to be more alert. And it really kind of punctuates the start of our day. And that can be really helpful when we're setting a wakeful routine first thing in the morning. And then, of course, conversely, the impact of that then at the other end of the day is for us to use light for what it's intended for. And then as we are traveling through our day and we get to our evening, that we start to use less light, so that we're signaling to our body that it's going to be time to go to sleep soon. So melatonin, which is the hormone that kind of elicits that sleepiness, is usually released about 2 hours before bedtime, but it's switched on by the onset of darkness. So if we can use light in the day strategically, that can really help us to set a really clear routine in terms of our sleep. And of course, our brain is a creature of habit, a creature of pattern. So if we can set those routines, that can be super helpful.
And Laura, unfortunately for us, there's quite large parts of the year, we're kind of maybe coming out the back end of it now, where it can be 8 a.m. before it's getting light, and that's often too late for people. What's your thoughts on sort of like these lamps, which I have one which kind of gradually wakes up and it supposedly provides that light, but sort of sad lights or lights that maybe emit a certain type of ray that can still have that impact? Do you think that they're valuable?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I don't have any research on those lamps, but what I would suggest is, firstly, any light when we wake up is helpful. The second thing, actually, which maybe sits in the myth, is that when we talk about getting daylight and absorbing that daylight into our eyes, often we think there has to be kind of bright sunlight, but actually even the early hours of daylight can be helpful. We might just need to spend a little bit more time outside in order to be able to kind of reap the benefits of that very, very early morning daylight. So we don't have to wait till it's kind of bright. We can absorb that light a little bit earlier. But to the question of the lamps, I also know a lot of people who use them, and whilst I'm not familiar with the science around them, I would suggest that the onset of that light is definitely helpful. But also, I would just check in on what works for you. And if you're someone that uses one of those lamps and it works for you, whether there's any science to back it up or not, even if it's placebo effect, if it works for you, keep on doing it.
I have to say, Laura, so it gradually lights up and gets brighter over half an hour. And by the time the alarm goes off, it's like waking up with a floodlight in my face. And it definitely does the job. It's not the best, but there's no way that you can't wake up with it. So like you say, it works for me. Laura, there's so many questions and things that people have asked. So maybe if I can do like a quick fire, something to you, and you can give us a little bit of info on whether good or bad, or maybe some information around it. So we've covered the sunlight one. Next one was the snooze button. So good or a bad thing impact that when you wake up, you can hit a button and it'll go off in, I think mine's like 9 minutes, which I always think is a weird number, but that is what it is. Good or bad?
Yeah, I'd avoid.
Okay.
We're getting into kind of 8 or 9 minute, mini naps or cycles. And actually, I think most of us that hit the snooze button, we account for that when we sleep. So we set our alarm, and then we know we're going to have 3, 4, however many snoozes after. Actually, we want to really protect our REM sleep. So the best thing to do is set your alarm for the latest possible time that you can, and allow yourself to spend more time in that REM sleep rather than those short bursts of maybe stage 1 or 2 sleep that we get in the snooze mode.
That's annoying. That is literally me. I've got an window. I'm like, that's 2 snoozes. Okay, fine. That's good. Next one is kind of similar to that, napping in the day.
Yeah.
Good or bad? And if good, like, or if you have any advice on if you're going to do it, how to do it best?
Yeah, definitely. So naps can be good and bad depending on what your sleep is like at night. So in a nutshell, I would say If you struggle to fall asleep at night, or you struggle to stay asleep, I would avoid napping until you've got a better kind of sleep routine at night, because napping in the day kind of steals some of that sleepiness. So when we want to go to bed later and we want to fall asleep, we're less sleepy. So sleepiness works almost like a seesaw. So we kind of build up that sleepiness in the day, and then we go to sleep and it kind of builds up that wakefulness, and we steal some of that when we nap. So if you don't have a great nighttime routine and good quality sleep, I'd avoid napping. But for those who do, strategic naps can be a brilliant thing. So that 3 o'clock afternoon slump that some of us kind of get, that can be a great time for us to take a short nap. It really allows us to come back into the present moment with some more focus, some more clarity, feeling a bit more refreshed. But the guidance that I would give on that is no longer than 20 to 30 minutes. So we're not transitioning into those deep levels of sleep, and not to do it too late into the afternoon. Otherwise, we may find that we're going to struggle to fall asleep again when we actually go to bed.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a danger time period, and I know that if I get through it, I'm okay. And just on that question, again, it was another pre-registered one. I found that adjusting how I eat throughout the day did have an impact on that as well. So if I have a big lunch, obviously the energy my body requires to digest the food was making me tired around that 2 or 3 o'clock. So now I kind of look to structure my day to have smaller meals throughout the day, so that there's not one time when your body's maybe overworking. And this isn't necessarily a nutrition conversation, but also looking at the types of food that you are having. So things which are higher in simple carbohydrates, Laura, obviously they're going to peak your blood sugar, but then they'll be associated with some lows after. So probably looking for more whole wheat, whole grain carbohydrates, as well as the good fats and proteins as well. Was that some advice that you'd give?
Yeah, definitely. And certainly, when we consider what we're consuming from a food and drink perspective, from a food point of view, I think anything that we consume that's very fatty quite late on in the day can sometimes disrupt our sleep. It takes us a little bit longer to kind of digest and metabolize fats. So steering away from that late on can be helpful. And also just not eating too late before we go to bed. So, we really want to go into those restorative sleep cycles and not be holding too much food heavy on our stomach that we've got to process before we can do the repair. So, but again, I think, as you do, it's really important that as individuals, we reflect on how the food that we consume impacts our sleep. And, I know for me, I love spicy food and it has no impact. My partner, if he has a spicy meal at night, if we have a curry, he'll be up half the night with his stomach kind of rolling if we've eaten too late. So it's really just recognizing what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and then you can make a more conscious choice.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that. And then the last one before we move on to the evening routine, we've covered alcohol, but caffeine. This is obviously a huge one, because I think the struggle with caffeine is it is so effective that when you get to those afternoon maybe slumps that people have mentioned, there is a solution for it in caffeine, but that might then impact your sleep, which then carries on to the next day. And then you get caught in this kind of wheel of just repeating the same behaviors. So what's your best advice for caffeine, when to consume it, how to consume it, all those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think, 2 or 3 cups of any kind of caffeine drink, whether it's tea or coffee, before 5 o'clock is generally okay for most people. Of course, then when you start to drink it a little bit later, that's when we notice that it can impact sleep. And of course, it is caffeine. So often people say coffee's bad, and it's not the coffee, it's the caffeine. Actually, coffee's got antioxidant properties and can be really good for us. So it is the caffeine. Caffeine actually stays in our body so much longer than alcohol. It has, kind of a half-life of around, depending on how quickly we metabolize it, between kind of 3 and 12 hours. So, when you consider how long it's in your system for, being strategic around when you choose to consume it can be, really, really helpful. So, yeah, a lot of people say, don't drink it kind of after 5 o'clock. There'll be a lot of people for whom if they drink it after lunchtime, they'll notice that it has an impact. So again, it kind of suppresses that REM sleep, and it keeps us in a state of alertness, which is great when we're tired in the afternoon. But of course, it's completely the opposite of what we want when we go to bed.
Yeah, for sure. And again, there's been quite a few questions about people who feel anxious and that affects their sleep, and coffee can obviously accelerate and exacerbate that as well. But Laura, related to that, there is obviously more things that we can do more intensely around the hours before bed. So what's your best evening routine advice?
Yeah, there's quite a few, so I'll perhaps pick the most impactful and easy ones. So the first one that I'd say is about your sleep environment. So making sure that you're creating the right conditions for a restful night's sleep. So that can include things like making sure that your room is really dark. We've talked about the fact that light stimulates the circadian rhythm. It stimulates us to want to be awake. So if we can invest in blackout curtains or blinds, that can be really helpful, or sleeping with a sleep mask. Creating conditions that are very quiet. So whether we need to sleep with earplugs, or we can just get rid of kind of technology distractions that might keep us awake, can be helpful. And then we know that we sleep more restfully when our room is at a cooler temperature. So between 15 to 19 degrees can be really helpful. So I like to kind of switch my radiator off in my bedroom and just keep it at that sort of nice cooler temperature to help me to drift off. So considering your environment is really important. And then I would also think about how you manage stress through your day will then impact how that shows up at night. And I know we've touched on anxiety also a little bit. And so there can be a couple of things that we can do at night time that can really help, or just before we go to bed, that can really help us with those sort of anxious thoughts. So I'd like to just share a couple of those, if I may, that I think are really helpful. So I don't know if you can relate to this, but it feels to me like when we go to bed at night and we switch the lights off, our thoughts become so loud. Our stresses become so loud, and we kind of hear them and we experience them in a more powerful way. And so often, if we can take some time in the evening to set aside what we call worry time, that can be really, really helpful. Now, it might sound a little bit crazy, why would I want to dedicate some time to worrying? But it has some really positive effects. So what we would encourage people to do is just simply to take a piece of paper and a pen in the evening, maybe an hour, a couple of hours before bed, and all of your stresses and anxious thoughts that are consuming your mind, just to write them all down. And what that really allows your brain to do is recognize that you've not forgotten any of them, and you're creating a dedicated time to sort of deal with them. So you write down all of the worries on one side of the paper, and then you flip it over and you move into solution mode, and you think about what are the actions that I can take to help to alleviate some of these stresses and worries. And when we can take some of those out of our mind and our brain recognizes that we've got some solutions or actions in place, actually the brain will just start to let some of them go, which means we can feel less anxious in that run up before bed. So I love that particular technique.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I actually used to work with a psychologist who asked me about my bedtime routine, and he was kind of asking me about like when I do my best thinking. And personally, I don't know about other people, but I do my best thinking, I think, often in the shower. And he was like, well, I want you to have a shower every night before bed. And I was like, well, I mean, that has double effect, right? Because I'll be clean, but it also allows me that time to have that thinking. And I didn't actually really realize that he wanted me to do it for that specific reason, but the consistency as well with that routine. It was almost like my brain knew, okay, it gets to a certain time, I have a shower, you sort of download your day, you clean as well, which is great, and then you actually feel like you're ready for bed. So unintentionally, maybe I've been doing that worry time. I think it's really good advice that you almost leave it separately away from sleep, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the shower thing, there's probably a third benefit to that as well, in that we know that as we move into those kind of sleep cycles, as we move into the second sleep cycle, our body temperature continues to drop. And actually, if we have a shower or a bath, an hour or whatever before bed, that will then encourage our body temperature to drop. So we feel nice and relaxed because we've been nice and warm. And then our body temperature will already be starting that process of cooling, which can help us to sleep more quickly too.
Amazing. More showering, if you ask me then.
Yes.
Laura, I'm conscious of time. We've got so much to cover. And we've hopefully covering as many of the audience questions as well along the way. But I think it's now time that you maybe are going to test me on some trivia. But hopefully that will help some other people as well.
Yeah, of course. There's one thing also, sorry, that I'd just like to share before we move on, which is kind of a bedrock of Headspace ethos, which is about being kind to yourself. So, we definitely know that if you're frustrated when you get into bed and you get more frustrated and more anxious, actually that can be counterintuitive and stop you from falling asleep. So, recognizing those moments where those emotions are showing up before bed and just learning to be kind to yourself. It sounds like such a simple thing, but it can play such a hugely important part in allowing us to let go of those thoughts and to create the mindful conditions for a good night's sleep. So just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe that's good advice before you test me as well, in case I get them all wrong. It's okay. Okay, cool.
Fab. So I have, in true reader style, a little trivia card.
Nervous.
So I'm going to ask you questions and let's see how we go.
Okay.
So if you're ready, the first one is fact or fiction? The brain and body shut down during sleep.
I'll just have to say fact or fiction.
Yeah, but you can give a little bit of knowledge if you pick some up along the way.
So based on what you've said about REM sleep, I'm going to say fiction because your brain is still working, but it's maybe not like the conscious thinking that we do when we're awake. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we know that there are periods where our body is active because it's doing those restorative kind of actions, and then also periods where our brain is very active in terms of processing. So yeah, absolutely correct.
Laura, can I share a story? I was doing my research for this and it blew my mind. And humans can't do this. I think it's birds somewhere in the world. It's not a good start to a fact when you don't really know what it's some sort of bird, and they sleep in packs. And apparently the outer birds, so imagine a circle, there's a bird either side, they can switch off one side of their brains and have the other side active. So basically, if you imagine you're on the outside, the right-hand side of your brain, you can well, actually it's your left because your brain works in opposites, right? So your left-hand side of your brain is active and your right eye is keeping a lookout for 180 degrees one side. And then the bird on the other side does the opposite. And apparently then at some point they switch sides and then they let the other side sleep whilst the other eye keeps lookout. Amazing. But we can't do that. And it's not that relevant, but it was interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, how good would it be if we as humans could do that? But I think actually it's a really important point that you raised just very quickly, in that from an evolutionary standpoint, we're one of the few species, organisms who actually leave ourselves completely vulnerable for 7, 8, 9 hours. And so, ducks and birds and whales and dolphins do exactly what you described, with, kind of one half of the brain being awake so they can be on alert, ready for any threats, but allowing the other side to be restful. And whilst we're not completely clear on the science behind it, it just shows from an evolutionary point of view that as humans, that's just not something that, that we need to do, although we could maybe be more efficient if, who knows, maybe we could, maybe we wouldn't.
Certain people are speaking. I wouldn't mind switching one side off every now and again. Not you though, obviously. Anyway, next question.
Brilliant. So the second one is napping. So again, fact or fiction, napping promotes the same benefits as nighttime sleep.
Oh, I'm going to say fiction, but that's a hard one. I think you can maybe feel refreshed, but I don't think you'll get into that deeper REM sleep. So I imagine the restorative effect isn't quite the same.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are those benefits exactly as you mentioned, but we should really be supplementing good sleep with a nap. and not using it instead of, for exactly the reasons that you mentioned.
Nice. I'm doing far too well here.
You are doing very well. Let's see how you do with this one.
Okay.
So once you're in bed, you should stay there until you fall asleep, no matter how long it takes.
Oh, so I do, but I think no. But yeah, I don't know. Like, if you can't sleep, is just laying with your eyes shut. Do you know what? Someone once threw me with my sleep when they said, to get to sleep, you pretend that you're asleep. And I thought it was really weird. And I was like, I'm just pretending to be asleep here. And that made me not be able to sleep that well for a long time. So I'm going to say fiction. I imagine you should maybe change environment and then go back to bed, but then you're eating into your time. So I'll give you fiction as an answer, but I've not really committed to any answer there.
Yeah, you're right again. Continuing the winning.
That one wasn't really though.
So with this one, what we recommend is that whilst you're in bed, if you notice that you're struggling to fall asleep or you're not feeling particularly rested, after about 20 minutes, if you've not dropped off, the best thing to do is get up and move to a different room. The reason for that is probably twofold, actually. The first is that if we lie in bed awake and we become maybe frustrated, whatever the emotion is that we feel, our brain might start to associate our bed with that wakeful, frustrated state. And as we mentioned earlier, the brain loves to work in patterns and familiar behaviour. So we don't want to create that association. So what we should do is get up and move into a different space and just do something relaxing, whether that be reading or and if we read a paper book as opposed to getting our technology out and blasting ourselves with all of that light. So reading or maybe listening to music. There's loads of research that suggests that listening to music has a really soothing, calming effect, reduces the release of cortisol. And within the Headspace app, we have loads of sleep music that can be listened to. So something nice and relaxing, and we just do that until we feel sleepy, and then we move back to the bed and we try again.
Perfect. I think that's great advice.
Next one, in an interesting one again. So is remembering dreams a sign that we've had a good quality night of sleep?
So I don't really ever remember my dreams, which makes me think I don't dream, but I don't think that's true. I would say that if you don't remember your dreams, that's a better sign of a good night's sleep because you're in deeper sleep, but that could be nonsense.
Yeah, to be honest, it's a bit of a trick question, this one. So the reason for that is that, so firstly, most of us dream every night. And sometimes, again, depending on how many REM cycles we've gone through, we could dream 4 to 5 times per night, but most of us just don't remember them. And so when we dream, the likelihood of being able to recall the dream depends on what cycle we're in when we wake up. So if we're in the midst of a dream when we wake up, we're much more likely to remember it than we are if we just continue right the way through. So if we wake up during it, we're much more likely to remember it, but that's not indicative of whether we've had a good night of sleep or not.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. I think we've got one more, Laura.
One last one, which is you can catch up on your sleep at the weekends, and this is a good idea.
So I would look at it as you can't catch up on it because you have the night and then you have the day, and your day is already affected by the poorer night's sleep. So I think it'd be a bad thing to think anyway, personally. Can you catch up? So have more and then your body will be... I'm going to say no, but I do think that if you're really tired, you'll probably sleep longer, which can maybe be an accumulative effect of several nights poor sleep. But for me personally, it seems like a poor approach that you work yourself too hard in the week and then you try and catch up on the weekend and repeat that cycle. But I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Well, that is 5 out of 5. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so what we know is that, and you mentioned it again earlier, people wear as a badge of honor this kind of, I've had 4 hours sleep and I've worked today and I felt great. And then we almost treat ourselves to a lie-in on the weekend, that kind of luxury Sunday morning lie-in for those of us that like it. And whilst it's okay every now and again to use the weekend to catch up on sleep, actually what we know is that the quality of our sleep is much better when we have a consistent sleep schedule. So when we go to bed and we get up, give or take 20 minutes, the same time every night. And I'm sorry to say that's even on a weekend.
Yeah.
So it helps us to set that body clock. So where we can, we need to be, potentially giving up those Sunday morning lie-ins and just being consistent with the rest of the week.
Do you know, I think that for me was quite a big game changer, was going to bed and trying to wake up at similar times at the weekends, because then for me, a Monday morning didn't feel like a Monday morning. It was just continuing with that. And I think those small changes make such a huge difference. I think you were far too kind with the marking there, Laura, but I enjoyed the quiz anyway. We've got 5 minutes left. I wanted to cover because there's some genuine science into meditation, mindfulness, what Headspace provide and the kind of content. So did you want to cover that just to wrap up?
Yeah, of course. So we know that from a meditation and mindfulness perspective, these two tools and skills, practices can really help with our sleep. So as just a quick introduction, at Headspace, we like to define mindfulness as our ability to be present in the moment, so free from distraction, so with an open, curious and kind mind. So it can be helpful to think of the opposite of that as being on autopilot, where we're not consciously aware of our thoughts, our actions. And so mindfulness is a skill, which of course all skills need practice, and that's where meditation comes in. So meditation's like the training ground for mindfulness. So in the same way that you might go to the gym and you lift weights to become strong, we meditate in order to become more mindful and cultivate this skill of awareness. And so we know that meditation and mindfulness can play a hugely important role in creating the restful conditions that we need for a good night's sleep. There's a couple of stats that I'd like to share with you that support this. So what we know from our members using Headspace is that after just 10 days of meditating for 10 minutes a day, we can reduce our stress levels by around 14%. And that increases to 32% after just 30 days. So when we consider that often the thing that stops us really being able to drift off into a nice sleep is those anxious or stressful thoughts. And I mentioned earlier, what we do in the day can be really important in how our sleep routine plays out. If we can meditate during the day and reduce our stress levels, that can mean that often we don't have those same stressful or anxious thoughts before we go to bed. We know over a slightly longer period, so 8 weeks, our members have reported a 46% decrease in depressive symptoms and a 31% decrease in anxiety symptoms. So again, works in very much the same way, that we're not experiencing that same level of anxious thought. So it's, a little easier for us to, really be able to let those thoughts go before we go to bed. But we really like to help to create a healthy, restful state of mind in order that we're able to best transition into sleep.
Just talking to you, Laura, makes me feel more relaxed. I think you're very good at doing that.
Relaxed and not sleepy.
No, not at all. No, I didn't mean that. I think those numbers speak for themselves, and there's a reason why we partner with Headspace and why it's so popular. And just final thing, Laura, did you want to share maybe some of the kinds of content that are available on Headspace?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we have a whole section dedicated to sleep within our app. So I mentioned that whilst we're known for meditation, we are all now about, we're about how we bring mindfulness to our whole day. So what you notice when you're in the app is, first of all, the colour palette changes to this kind of much calmer, kinder purple colour. So it's nicer for our eyes. And within that section, we have a range of different elements of content that can help you to create those conditions for a restful sleep. So as an overview, we have sleep casts, which are these kind of soothing stories that, they're really immersive, that that can help us to drift off. My favourite as a recommendation is one called Midnight Laundrette. It's about 45 minutes long, and I still don't know how it finishes because I've never made it to the end awake.
That's good.
And then we have soundscapes, which are just natural sounds from, from jungles, from rivers, bird song, all these kind of natural sounds that can really help us to move into that restful space, along with kind of soothing music. What we do also know is that if you combine these wind down practices with meditation, they can be even more impactful. So we have a sleep health course, which is a 14-day course, and it contains a 10-minute meditation that you do during the day each day. And it's paired with activity that you can do at night. So whether that's a wind down routine from our app, or whether it's bringing awareness to some of the other tools. So, for example, we know that a lot of people wake up in the night, their mind might be racing, and we have content that can support that racing mind in helping you to calm that chatter and really to just kind of let those thoughts go. So there's so much to explore within the app, and I definitely encourage everybody that has access to Headspace to spend some time within the app and see what works for you, and just include it as part of your wind down routine before bed, as well as pairing it with meditation in the day.
Amazing. And if you are watching and you're a Vitality member and you'd like to make the most of these Headspace features that Laura's spoken through, then if you visit the member zone, you can get a 1-year Headspace subscription on us. So please do check that out. But Laura, we've covered so much, and thank you for sharing so much valuable information. I've enjoyed the quizzes, and there's just a lot of advice there. And I think one of the key messages that I've got from you is about just for everyone to play with these different things and really figure out what works best for you, because we are all really, really different. But yeah, I really appreciate your time and joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, and there's just so much that we could talk about. The conversation's been wonderful. So thank you for facilitating, and wishing everyone that's listening a wonderful night of sleep.
Love it. And I think that the power of sleep is so important, and this can make a real difference in your life. So for everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this session. Please do make sure to join us again for our future sessions. But in the meantime, take care, and we'll see you really, really soon.